Hey there, thanks a lot for joining me. I am hoping that all of this comes across well. It's been a long time, I've been away for 2 weeks, and today I'm going to get into some important topics about incredibly useful features in Vienna Ensemble Pro that I think a lot of composers out there are certainly there are lots that are working with this feature of coupling and preserving. There are some that avoid it because they're not sure exactly what it does, and the risks are just a little too high if you don't know what they do. And they're extremely powerful, very important components that help us understand also what a really productive composer's workflow is. So I think this video will be useful to anybody who's certainly using VE Pro, but people who maybe aren't using it and want to understand how it might enhance their workflow, where the bottlenecks are, and how VE Pro could really benefit you. So I'm going to talk about decoupling. I'm going to talk about preserving, how those instances work, what they are. And I'm going to try and make this relatively brief. Now, I have been away for 2 weeks, and for those who are kind of loyal subscribers to the channel, I want to let you know that I am going to be posting each Monday a schedule for the week's live stream so you know what's coming up and when they're going to be. Okay, so go to the community tab on my channel's homepage on YouTube, and you'll see a post there each Monday from me about the schedule. Enough about that. Let's get into this topic of decoupling and preserving. So in Vienna Ensemble Pro, or I'm going to call it VE Pro, which is a common term for it, there is the origins of why people used VE Pro, and that was so that they could do more work than maybe their computer could support. The idea originally was to offload very intensive computing tasks of delivering up high-end samples to other computers so that you could work on your main DAW computer and still connect all the instruments up, but not have to have one computer doing it all. Now, over time, computers have gotten a lot better. And now you can actually, as I do here, I actually run Vienna Ensemble Pro on the same computer. So I'm no longer really concerned about saving RAM. But it's an important thing to understand that the origins of VE Pro really come back to trying to boost up computer resources for your projects, for your composing workflow. That's where preserving, which is the most basic concept to understand, comes in. The idea of preserving came from the fact that if you created an instance in Vienna Ensemble Pro, and we'll look at this, but basically an instance is just a container for a bunch of instruments. If you had an instance that was connected, let's say, to your Cubase project, when you closed down Cubase, the instruments would disappear from Vienna Ensemble Pro, and that made a lot of sense when Vienna Ensemble Pro was simply a mechanism to expand your computer resources. But over time, we built up these enormous templates where we've got the entire orchestra, and we've got all the pitched percussion and all of the regular percussion, and we've got pianos, maybe we've got synths, maybe we've got different kinds of each. We've got triple winds, we've got so much stuff loaded up that if all of those sample libraries go away when I close my DAW, next time I open up a project, it's going to have to load all that stuff again, and it's just a time waster with these enormous templates that modern composers are working with. So they came up with this idea of preserving, where you could say, you know what, I want to preserve this instance, this container of instruments, which means that when I close my DAW, Vienna Ensemble is going to keep those instruments loaded. And that means that I could then switch off to another program. Maybe you do some work in Cubase, you do some work in Pro Tools, you do some work in Logic, and you want to be able to switch between these three, connecting to Vienna Ensemble Pro each step of the way without having to reload all this stuff, wasting 5 or 10 minutes waiting for it to load, waiting for it to unload, right? That's what preserving is really about. And I'm going to show you a demo of that in just a minute. The second and more advanced level of this is decoupling and coupling. And the problem with having preserved instances is that Cubase, or your DAW of choice, actually has to remember all of the configurations, just as it would if you loaded these instruments directly into your DAW. it has to remember all the configurations for each individual instrument, right? And that makes a lot of sense in certain contexts when you go back further in time and you see that, well, the main reason originally for using Vienna Ensemble Pro was to expand your resources. We weren't as concerned with switching DAWs and stuff like that. But again, as resources got better, as computers got better, as our templates got more and more enormous, it became really time consuming to have Cubase saving all the settings for all the instruments every time you closed it. Now, even though you could save time by preserving the instances and you didn't have to actually reload those instances, you did have to have Cubase and VE Pro negotiate the saving of all of the details. And I think there was a point at which people realized, you know, I don't really change my orchestral sound libraries very much at all. I'm simply accessing them. You know, I expect them to play back. I'm not changing settings on them. These are not the kinds of instruments that you frequently change a lot of settings on. So I don't want to have to waste time saving the settings and configurations for these enormous templates full of orchestral instruments just because I'm opening or closing my DAW. So VE Pro said, great, we're going to implement this idea called decoupling, where you can say, okay, it's a preserved instance, it's going to stay in VE Pro forever, just sitting there waiting to be used, great. But you can also decouple it, meaning that Cubase or Logic or whatever your DAW is not going to make an effort to save any of the settings. Now, of course, this comes with a consequence, which is that if you change settings in VE Pro that's specific to that project and you have everything decoupled, those settings are not going to be saved. So that could be a problem, but generally for orchestral templates especially, that's not a problem at all. So let me do a little demo here. Sorry, I'm just checking some of my stats to make sure that this is coming across well. Let's take me off and look at a little demo here. So I'm in Cubase, and I'm going to go ahead here. I'm going to add a rack instrument. I'm going to come down here and add Vienna Ensemble Pro. And this is a demonstration of how you create a preserved or unpreserved instance. So I'm going to go ahead and choose that. All right, yeah, sure, I'll create a track for that. And now when I load up this instrument here, where did it go? I feel like it's gone to another window somewhere and I can't see it. So I'm not sure where it has gone. Oh, of course it's gone over here because I zoomed out of the window. Okay, so let's say that this is how a Vienna Ensemble instance loads up. It's not connected to anything. I have to connect it. And I've got Vienna Ensemble Pro running. I'm going to go ahead and click New, and I'm going to call this Unpreserved. All right, and what we're going to see when I hit Connect is that up here in the left-hand corner, we're going to see an instance created called Unpreserved, and there it is. Okay, so Unpreserved currently right now contains no instruments. I could certainly load instruments into that instance. This thing up here is just called an instance. Now I could load things into it, and right now they are the instance is labeled unpreserved, but it has actually preserved it by default. You can see this lock here, and it matches this little icon up here that's locked. If I go ahead and click that to unlocked, and then I see it's unlocked up here, what that means is that if I close Cubase, I am going to lose this instance here. So let's just see what that looks like. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and save this, close that, and everything's gone from VE Pro. So in a workflow situation, this would be fine if I was only wanting to expand my computer resources by maybe connecting to an instrument server, and when I close my DAW, I don't need anything loaded anymore. However, what happened there can be a problem if I wanted to switch between, say, Cubase to Dorico and I wanted to load the same instruments, because now if my instance had an entire orchestra in it that took 5 or 10 minutes to load up all the samples, I've now wasted that time, because now that I switched to Dorico, I'm going to load it up, and if I wanted to use that same instance, I have to wait for it to load again, right? So that's a big drag. So let's go back here to a situation where we've got Cubase running. I'm just going to wait for it to load up here. All right, and we are going to open my recent project. So now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to turn preserved on here. All right. Now, what's going to happen now is that really this instance should be called preserved. So I'm going to go ahead and change that name, because once I close Cubase in this situation, that instance is going to stay put. So I can close Cubase, but this instance, including sort of all the, hypothetical instruments, imagine that I've loaded an entire orchestra into that, it's still waiting there. I could now load up Dorico, connect to that instance, and access everything. I don't have to load up all my samples, all my instruments again, wasting time, right? So, okay, let's look at this a little deeper and get into what coupling is. So we have this little icon up here, looks like sort of a recycling sign. And this can decouple just this instance. If you have multiple Vienna Ensemble Pro instances set up in your DAW, then you can use this button here to decouple all. We've only got one instance here. But decoupling is very helpful, because what decoupling is going to do is it's going to work on a preserved instance. However, Cubase is not going to save any of the settings. So with just the preserved instance being connected, Cubase is actually going to go to VE Pro when it closes, and it's going to retrieve all the settings, and it's going to save that as part of the Cubase project. And depending on how large your project is, that could be time consuming, could be a waste of time, especially if you are just running an orchestral template and you hardly ever make any changes, if ever, to any of the instruments. Having Cubase go to VE Pro and retrieve all the settings for the entire orchestra, bring it back, save it into the file. Then when you load up the Cubase file, next time you want to work on the project, it has to digest and compute and relay all of that to VE Pro. It's expensive in terms of time, and it's a waste because there's no real settings being saved. So if I go ahead and I hit decouple on this, now when I close it, the preserved instance is still preserved, and I'm just going to save this so that I can have some continuity. This is still preserved, but if there had been any settings changed during the process, I would actually have to save this VE Pro project, which you can do. Hey Shubhas, thanks for joining me today. I know it's a totally irregular time. So if I wanted to, I could come into VE Pro here and I could say, okay, save server project, and then this becomes a project that I know has all the settings maybe from that. And that's a viable workflow where you decouple the instances in your DAW and you also save the VE Pro project. I don't tend to do that very much. I have one VE Pro project that has everything in it. I pretty much never change any of the settings on the individual instruments. There are some parameters that I can automate, that I've set up automation in VE Pro, but the automation is already saved in my Cubase file or my Dorico file. But I do decouple generally all of my instances. I certainly preserve them all. And I have one Vienna Ensemble Pro project that has everything that I generally use. Now later on this week, I am going to, on Wednesday, I'm going to talk about when you'd want to maybe mix the preserved and the decoupled, because there are situations where you may not want to preserve something. For example, let's say that you're working on a project and yeah, you're using your normal orchestra, but you're just using, I don't know, one instrument that you really don't want to incorporate into your template forever. You're just using it on this one project. Maybe it's a synth, maybe it's, you know, a kazoo or you know, some instrument that you know you're not going to really use a lot, but you need for this project. Then it can be nice to just have it in an unpreserved instance that is coupled to Cubase. So Cubase has to save all the settings, and you know that next time you open up your Cubase project, it's going to load that instance into VE Pro with that kazoo in there, and it's all going to connect up. But that's very inexpensive, right? Because it's one instrument in an instance. It's not a significant amount of settings. And then you have your decoupled and your preserved instances for the rest of the orchestra, let's say. I'm going to demonstrate that on Wednesday and talk more about it. Let me just check out your, yes, thanks. Thank you for welcoming me back. I was sick as a dog just before Christmas, for those of you who maybe didn't know that. So you're commenting, in the past when I had VE Pro working, I did decouple and save the server project. It does indeed save a lot of time, yes. I know you and I have had a number of dialogues about trying to get it working, and VE Pro can be there's definitely a variety of problems I've had to overcome in getting it to work. Particularly with very large templates. If you're a composer and you are trying to work with very large templates that use a ton of RAM, I mean, my template when I load it up, yeah, probably ranges, depending on the project, between at least 40 gigs up to maybe 70 or 80 gigs of loaded samples. And I can do that on my computer now, but I could not have done that on my computer 10 years ago. That would have been impossible. So a big part of what's making all of this possible now is just better computers, stronger processors, incredibly huge volumes of RAM. So it does really save a lot of time. And if you're a composer who's finding yourself wasting a lot of time opening and closing and saving projects, or switching between Cubase to Dorico to Logic to Pro Tools, then VE Pro will save you a lot of time, and understanding very clearly what preserving and decoupling means, how they're different, when you might want to combine them, when you maybe don't want to use them, is all sort of an essential part of the toolkit. So with that, I can see on my clock here, I'm at about 18 minutes. That's plenty time. Just reiterate for anybody who's a normal kind of common viewer of the channel, I am now posting my weekly schedule on the community tab on my channel. So I'm hoping that that'll help people understand what's coming up. If there's topics they're particularly interested in, I invite everybody to post comments, send questions, that sort of thing as well. I will be out of town on Friday, but I'll be posting a video anyway, and the topic is there on the community page. If you have any questions or comments on this video, of course, post. Thank you so much for watching, and I will just check this last comment. Problems maxed out. Yeah, RAM is not always the problem. If you're using a Mac and you want to know how much RAM to use, go ahead and load up Activity Monitor, and that should give you a readout of how much RAM you're using when you're loading up your template. If you're within 5 or 6 gigabytes of whatever RAM your computer has, you should be fine. That's been my experience. And that's great. I'm glad to hear that the posted schedule will be a big help. Now you'll know what topics I'm going to cover, and hopefully can make it to all the live streams. I certainly understand people like to watch these videos after the fact as well. I like having people on live, of course, but my main objective is to connect with as many composers as I can, other people out there on the internet who are doing what I'm doing. And I just want to do everything I can to try to build a community here. So thanks again. And